Russian President Vladimir Putin and Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu meet with soldiers during a visit to a military training center in the Western Military District for mobilized reserves, outside the town of Ryazan, on October 20, 2022. Mikhail KlimentyevAP Pictures. While the U.S. midterm results indicate a much tighter-than-expected race between Republicans and Democrats vying for control of Congress, voting is closely watched in Ukraine and Russia, both measuring how the election will be affected. War and geopolitics. Despite not making a public statement, Moscow appears to favor a Republican win in the midterm elections in hopes that a major power shift could bring change in the United States. Foreign policy towards Ukraine, and the massive U.S. financial support for Kiev to fight Russia, could deepen the roar of discontent among Republicans. 9 months of the ongoing conflict and the Biden administration have committed more than $18.9 billion in security assistance to Ukraine, according to the latest figures from the Department of Defense. However, there are some signs that bipartisan support for such massive and ongoing aid may be waning as prominent Republicans begin to question how long the U.S. will last. Generosity may persist, especially against the backdrop of inflation, potential recession, and rising costs of living. First, prominent Republican Kevin McCarthy said in an October interview that there would be no blank check for Ukraine if Republicans won a majority in the House of Representatives in the midterm elections. A slip in power, and Ukrainian support? Russia can hope that a change of power after the midterm elections will herald a colder attitude towards Ukraine. But analysts say Moscow may be disappointed if former leader Donald Trump fails to return to power, signaling that he may unveil his plan to run for president again in 2024 next week. The end of 2023, said Ian Bremmer, founder and chairman of the Eurasia Group Consultancy, in comments emailed this week. Also, despite House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy's announcement of no blank checks for Ukrainians in a Republican-led House, most Republicans remain loyal to Ukrainian support. The U.S. is giving military aid, the Europeans are giving financial aid, which changes little on the ground, he added. Russian President Vladimir Putin listens to the then U.S. President Donald Trump speaks at a press conference in Helsinki, Finland in 2019. Brendan Smielowski, AFP Pictures. Bremmer added that the bigger problem comes from Trump's announcement of the presidential election and that he expects such a statement soon. He added that this would likely be accompanied by blaming Biden for fighting a populist opposition to the billions of taxpayers spent on Ukraine. NATO allies tried to appease Ukraine's president on Tuesday. Moscow's notoriety. Moscow has earned itself a dubious reputation when it comes to U.S. democratic processes, which is suspected of interfering in the 2016 election and continuing to stir up political discord in and out of the country. Russia has done little in recent years to dispel suspicions of its involvement in a series of nefarious activities, from alleged cyber attacks to disinformation campaigns aimed at influencing U.S. voters in elections. Putin's close confidant, Yevgeny Prigozhin, an increasingly powerful oligarch who leads a state-sponsored private military group known as the Wagner Group fighting in Ukraine, and several companies involved in the 2016 U.S. election intervention, has openly implied that he interfered in the U.S. midterm exams. We interfered, and will continue to interfere with U.S. elections, Prigozhin said in comments released by the press service. Concord Catering Company on VKontakte, the Russian equivalent of Facebook. Yevgeny Prigozhin is a Russian businessman and close ally of Vladimir Putin. He recently admitted that he founded the Wagner Group, a private military company fighting in Ukraine, in 2014. Mikhail KlimentyevAP Pictures. U.S. State Department spokesman Ned Price said on Monday that the Biden administration was not surprised by Prigozhin's admission, telling a briefing that, if anything, his bold confession seems to be a manifestation of the impunity that President Putin and his pals enjoy. The Kremlin. Prigozhin did not say whether the election interference was aimed at bringing Republican candidates to power, but Russia was found to intervene in the 2016 U.S. election to undermine Hillary Clinton's campaign and strengthen Trump's campaign, which maintains presidential relations between the United States and the United States. Russia dissolved. The Kremlin said on Wednesday that the by-elections will not improve bad relations between Moscow and Washington and dismissed allegations that Russia interfered with the vote. These elections cannot change anything important, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov told reporters. Relationships are still bad and will remain so. Bipartisan support firm, for now. Analysts tend to agree that what we can potentially see is a decline in financial support, but by no means a complete withdrawal of aid, at least for now. It is unlikely, but not entirely impossible, that the new U.S. Congress will reduce U.S. military and financial support for Ukraine over time, Berenberg Bank chief economist Holger Schmieding said in a note Wednesday. So that could affect the situation on the battlefield, prolong the war, impair Ukraine's ability to deal with the costs of war, and trigger a new wave of refugees to the EU. But for now, time, and the US political establishment, seems to be on Ukraine's side. So far, a solid bipartisan consensus has underpinned US support for Ukraine, Schmieding said, noting that despite some recent grunts from the fringes of both US political parties, Berenberg Bank said that consensus, at least for as long as he added that he expects it to continue. Trump-style America First populists aren't occupying the White House. The potential signal a U.S. amendment could send to China about the U.S. commitment to defend a beleaguered democracy against aggression is a strong argument to keep the course. Should be. We still need to monitor tail risk, said Timothy Ash, senior emerging market strategist at Blue Bay Asset Management, in the United States. Given the eroding Putin regime, the interest in continuing to support Ukraine. Regime change in Russia should give the United States its best chance of knocking out Putin. It is weakening militarily, economically, diplomatically. And yes, the US would definitely like to see Putin removed from power. The calculation can't be as bad as Putin, who will be the next Russian leader. Europe is watching. Analysts noted that the military situation in Ukraine could well determine how and for how long US support for Ukraine will continue, with Kiev trying to show its allies that it can and will win the war. Western military aid continues to flow to him. Judging by the conversations with military experts, time is now on the side of the Ukrainian armed forces, Schmieding said. Russian President Vladimir Putin speaks at a press conference at the Russian sanatorium in Sochi, Russia, on October 31, 2022. Contributor Pictures.